Hi, my name is Heather Sloan. I'm the director of our Post-Adoption Connection Center. We've created this video for you today to talk about the safety plan that you're completing right now as a part of your home study process, and specifically addressing the respite care provider form that we have given to you. We encourage you to share this with your home study agency, especially if you are working with an agency that is not Nightlight, so they are aware of these forms and they can understand the purpose of these forms and why we have you fill this out. Speaking to the purpose, this safety plan is meant to be an exercise for you to take the time now when you have a lot more time, you're in a better state of mind, to find all of the support people and organizations that are going to support you after your child comes home. If you wait until after your child is home and you are experiencing post-adoption depression or experiencing a crisis with your child that would cause you to have a need for any of these professionals, it's going to be a lot harder to find the space and the emotional energy at that time to do the research. So while this work might feel a little tedious right now during your home study process, this is an important exercise for you to pay attention to and really do the work on. You will thank yourselves later once this information has already been gathered to you if you were to need it in the future. This form should be accessed if you are experiencing symptoms of post-adoption depression, which is very common with adopted parents, or a crisis with your child, where you need support as adults in the situation or support for your child because of what's going on in that crisis. So looking at the form could be helpful for you to pull that out so you can follow along with me. You'll see at the top, one of the first steps we ask you to engage in is your agency. And going back to your home study worker, going back to your post-placement worker to ask for help and assistance, especially if you are experiencing any of the post-adoption depression symptoms that we have listed out there for you. If you're experiencing more than just a couple of those, you could be starting to feel some depression. So that's why we have those listed out for you. The next couple of steps go into encouraging you to reach out to a support group of adoptive families that's in your area, perhaps through your church or faith community, through an organization in town, maybe just a gathering of other adoptive families, even if it's not in a formal setting. Also identifying doctors and counselors for you as well as for your child, so that if you're experiencing post-adoption depression, if there's a crisis going on with your child where you know that you and your child need help, you have those counselors, you have those doctors already identified. The next section there are your support people. These are going to be your close friends and family, the ones that you probably already rely on for emotional support. You will need them in a greater way after adoption, especially if you're experiencing a crisis or post-adoption depression. So we ask you to identify those people now, the ones that you would turn to for a shoulder to cry on or just to lean on for support. The next section talks about respite care, which is what we want to talk a little bit more about here in this video. Respite care is different than just babysitting or finding somebody to come and take the child for the day or for the evening, maybe even for a weekend so that you can get away on a vacation. But respite care comes in when you need a break to reset, to re-energize. If there is particularly a crisis going on with your child where you feel like if we could take a temporary time of separation from one another, we could be better. We could come back together and continue to seek healing, but you just need a little bit of a break. And then with post-adoption depression, if you're getting deeper into a depression and it feels scary to still kind of even have your child around because you're not able to give them the care that you know that they deserve because of what's going on inside you internally. So we recommend looking at respite care. It is meant to be temporary, maybe a couple of days, maybe even a couple of weeks, could be up to a couple of months depending on the situation. And this is intentional care for the child by another family or another individual that is equipped to take them in. Ultimately, when we start looking at respite care options for our families, this is to prevent your adoption dissolution. That if that crisis is escalating or your depression is escalating to a point where you might have to consider permanently finding a new home for your child away from you, we want to prevent that. We want you to find healing. We want your child to find healing. We want to be a support to you, and we know that respite care can give that support just a time of a short, temporary, just separation from one another so that you and your child can reset and then come back together and start doing the work again toward healing. We have made this respite care provider form as an additional outside form. It's a little bit more involved because what we were finding is that when families were going through a crisis or going through a depression, that we would turn toward their safety plan that had a couple of names listed on it as respite care providers. But when we would say to them, what about these friends and family that you wrote down? The response is typically, oh no, I couldn't contact them. No, the needs of my child are too much for that friend or for that, I put my mother on that form. It's too much for her. I couldn't do that to her. So it's not helpful if we don't identify respite care providers that can truly take your child into their home when you really need them to. So that's why we've created a more in-depth form. I want to give you guys some direction on what kinds of families to look for with this. First and foremost, they need to be safe people that can provide love and care for your child safely. So these should be people that you know, but maybe are not necessarily in your inner circle. Your inner circle are the people that you're going to be listing on this form as your support friends and family. These are ones that you will be turning to probably during the time that the crisis is growing for you or the depression is growing for you. But these people, if your respite care providers are just outside of your inner circle, then you aren't going to the friends that have already been supporting you and laboring with you and may even be a little exhausted from providing you support. Also, if your child goes to a different family, then your inner circle friends and family can still continue to support you during that time of respite care. So they should be people that you might kind of know through church or your faith community, know through the adoption community, know in your neighborhood where you know them pretty well, but they maybe aren't necessarily the closest people to you. They certainly need to live close and live in your community, and you cannot pick a family that is outside of your state. That crosses into some other legal boundaries that, especially for just a temporary couple of days, couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, we want to find somebody in your state. There could also be respite care centers available in your city. These are probably in larger cities, larger communities, where it is kind of a group home structure that is temporary and meant for respite care. So you could do some research to try to find a respite center. We wouldn't recommend that you only choose respite centers for your 2 respite care options. Maybe one of them be somebody that you know and one of them can be a respite care center. Some other ideas on how to identify these people, because we know that it could be a little bit hard to find somebody that meets all of these guidelines. Look in your church, your faith community, look in adoption support groups. Since we're already encouraging you to identify one, start getting involved now. A lot of these support groups will take in families while they're in process. So take a look at the adoption community that's surrounding you, especially any families that have experience with foster care. They're trained to take in children that have some higher needs and some higher struggles. And so those could be some really good options for you to consider for respite care. Or you can think about a friend of a friend. Even if it's not someone that maybe you know very well, one of your friends knows that person very well and can vouch for them, that they would be a safe place for your child to go to take a temporary break away from one another. These guidelines are certainly not a must-have. So if you have listened to this video and you've thought about all the people in your life and you cannot come up with anybody, then there are other options for respite care. You certainly can choose somebody in your inner circle. We're not saying you cannot. We are just recommending that they may not be the best people to consider and to think outside of your inner circle first. So if you are struggling to come up with individuals that can meet this requirement after doing a lot of thought and digging around and research into who could play the role as your respite care provider, then come back to your home study agency, to your program manager, to try to come up with some other ideas on how to identify these respite care people. Again, the purpose of this form is not to create more paperwork for you, but to really be a help and a support to you whenever the time comes. And we hope the best for you. We hope you never have to utilize those people. But we also recognize there are situations where that's going to be needed, and we want you to be supported as best as possible. Thank you so much.